Hi everybody, and welcome to the COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Committee meeting of the 2nd of June 2020. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to present and emerging. I'll note item 2 that we don't have any apologies or members on leave of absence. They're all accounted for. So I will go to the Manager of Governance to see whether we have any public questions under item 3.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't received any public questions or statements.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I note that we don't have any responses to previous questions or notice in the agenda either. So we'll go to declarations of interest. CEO, are there any declarations this evening?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, none received.
Thank you, CEO. Applications for leave of absence, item 5, council members. Okay, now that the borders are open, I'll keep asking. Okay, and item 6, confirmation of minutes. So this is for last week's, the minutes of last week's meeting, 26th of May 2020. Could I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski. All those in favour? And declare the minutes carried. Thank you. So that takes us to business arising, and the first item, as always, 7.1 COVID-19 weekly update. And we have had a late report provided, given that there was a significant announcement on Friday with phase 3 coming into effect as of next Saturday, the 6th of June. So significant changes afoot, and quite a step up from phase 2. So I'll call for a mover and second, and then we can take questions and comments. Moved Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I don't have any questions. I wonder if it's probably a good time to have an update from the Manager of Built Eny Wellbeing, given this is a major announcement, and I realise it was made not that long ago, so I really appreciate the updated report that we received today, and perhaps we can just hear how this is going to affect us in the next week or so.
Well, before we go for an update, which I'm very keen to hear from the Manager of Built Environment and Wellbeing, I just thought I'd check in with Councillor Gontaszewski to see if you have any specific questions that you'd like Mark to address.
Specific questions in relation to the implementation plan update as written in the agenda. I had a question in relation to when the at which COVID meeting or council meeting it's intended that the arts relief funding will be presented to. I note the review is going to be completed by the 9th of June, but just wasn't sure about meeting schedule. That was my question.
Well, we might come back to that. I think probably best if we deal with phase 3 first, and then we can take further questions. So just Manager, I did have a few questions in relation to phase 3. I might just run through them. Happy to go visit them, but I thought it might be best to ask them up front. And some might be more for directors. But I was just interested to know your thoughts about the new 2 square metre rule and what that what's happening with the sort of 1.5 metre message. Are the two coexisting together? I'm very interested to see that 300 people in multi-space venues with the ability to seek exemptions to have further where their spaces require that, and whether that applies to both public and commercial premises, such as you consider the Luna, for example, with various cinemas. With the Beatty Park Leisure Centre plan, I was just interested to know whether we would be seeking an exemption for Beatty Park potentially, and whether phase 3 allows for the return of the swim school. I note that the report, and this might be more for the director, but I note that the report talked about the library weekend hours aren't currently being considered, given that their staffing levels may not be sufficient to monitor. But I thought maybe we could discuss whether combining or having the staff combine their shift would allow for at least one of the 2 weekend days to be open again, or if not, when we could potentially look at that. Interested to know whether there are any special requirements around playgrounds. I'm assuming we don't need to clean them, but that is an assumption. I think the other questions are more relevant, not specific to phase 3. So can I hand over to you, Manager, for a bit of an update? And for the last minute report, noting that the announcement was made on Friday ahead of a long weekend before 15 days before the new phase comes into being.
Thank you to you, Mayor Cole. One thing, it is difficult to try and predict what is going to be in these COVID announcements, but one thing we can predict is that we either get them on Friday afternoon or Sunday night, which makes our jobs a bit more interesting. In terms of phase 3, the parameters have changed significantly, and WA has been the first state to reduce the density rule down to 2 square metres. We feel that we did a lot of work during phase 2 to set businesses and our community facilities up to enable this to occur. So, for example, our health officers have actually gone out and helped businesses to measure their floor area. So now they can just do a fairly simple calculation and to reassess that number. So that's a real positive. In terms of how that relates to the 1.5 metre social distancing rule, what I have noticed is a slight change in the language during phase 3, where they say 1.5 metres where possible, which means that it's not presented as strictly 1.5 metres. So that's something that we need to consider in terms of the level of risk that we would be prepared to accept. I would feel more comfortable to continue to push the 1.5 metre message. I think there may be some circumstances where it could be considered as a where possible, but we'll need to look at each of those on their merits and actually do a risk assessment of those particular matters. In terms of the exemption for BD Park, and I did speak to the manager of BD Park today about that, and they do intend to apply for an exemption. In terms of the 300-person limit, they definitely cannot go straight to operating as they were pre-COVID. Some factors to consider, for example, a swim school that has a lot of people coming in, and that can really bump the numbers over 300. My expectation would be, and this hasn't been tested yet in terms of applying for an exemption, it's still early days, is that if we're able to demonstrate that we're able to manage those numbers and manage the traceability, which I think BD Park has been exceptional at, then we should be able to achieve that exemption. I don't see any reason why not, especially if it's a facility that caters for the wider community and actually does some really positive things like swimming lessons, which is one of the activities that does test that number. In terms of the playgrounds, the advice from the WA government is really mainly around hand hygiene being the main control. So their advice and their frequently asked questions is to bring along your hand sanitizer and wash your hands regularly. And on that note, I think it's quite challenging to implement a sanitisation of playgrounds program because it's such a highly frequently used facility, and even say if you go and do a sanitising 3 times a day, you can be guaranteed almost immediately that it will become insanitary fairly quickly. So the main control there is hands and people taking along their hand sanitizer, and we can definitely provide communications to the community to that effect. The other factors are in terms of the use of public spaces by restaurants, is that the traceability aspects within COVID safety plans would still be in place. So that means that businesses would still be required to keep names and contact details of people who are using their, attending their business. which means that there still needs to be that level of control over crowds. So I think I've answered all of your questions. Just the library question, I think the Executive Director for Community and Business may have something to say there, but my understanding is that the numbers within the library at this stage have not been significantly high. So I guess part of the monitoring of that particular facility is to examine the level of demand for in-person library services, considering many people are still using online library services.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll just supplement that by saying we have noticed that the public are cautious in returning to the library, so they're comfortable to come in and pick up or drop off, but they're not necessarily spending time there. That's been suitable because we have been focused on making sure we have social distancing in place. So the numbers in the library are fairly low. I think, as the manager just said, we'll keep an eye on it and make sure that we are monitoring that, and that as demand starts to pick up, when people's confidence returns, they start to get out a little bit more, then we'll make the necessary changes. We think it's also probably that, dropping in at the library is part of your life cycle, such as dropping kids at school or going to the shops. So when those other supplementary activities have been slowed down, then people aren't coming to the library in the same way. So yeah, interesting. We're not seeing as many people at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Director. So what I'm taking from that is where the demand becomes measurable, then the shifts are likely to increase. And I think that when we're saying a return of sport at the rec centre and people coming and going, that's going to be something that creates that traffic going to and from with the parents and children back and from the library. So, yep, that's good. And I'm very happy to see ping pong happening at the community centre today, which was really quite joyful. Okay, thanks very much for those updates. I'll now go back to Councillor Castle just to check whether you had any further questions or comments.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I did have just one, possibly for the CEO. I just wondered if we could get some more detail on the staff returning to work in administration. In the original report, it talks about 8th of June, and I'm just wondering, is that the full staff or is that a staged process? And if so, how long is that going to take?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we're transitioning staff back to their usual workplace from next Monday. The only proviso on that is just the limited amount of IT equipment and computer equipment, and we'll transition that back in a staged way depending on what the current arrangements are for staff who are working from home and are working from home productively. I could probably just ask the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment just to comment on that in terms of the desk allocation and the building itself.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So as you know, we've been painting the building, just doing a bit of work while the building's been empty. So that's all scheduled to finish this Friday, if not sooner. We've got a desk for every person that's returning. So there's, I think that's COVID best practice. There's no need for desk sharing. So staff can come back at will, whenever their managers or their directors, arrange that. So the building will be ready for reoccupation next week. So we're all good to go.
Thank you. And so do you anticipate that staging to take a number of weeks or over the course of the week? What sort of time frame are you looking at?
Yes, Michael, I think it's what the CEO said. It's just the limitations on the ICT being set up. So staff will bring back their equipment. They might need a bit of help setting up. So we certainly wouldn't want everyone returning on Monday, but it shouldn't take very long to get everyone back. I would imagine, it would be 2 weeks before everyone will be back, if everyone wants to, come back immediately anyway. So, and from speaking to staff, we have groups of staff that are desperate to get back in the office. They, a bit tired of not being in the office. And we have groups of staff that have enjoyed the flexibility, so we'll move between more than one location. And a lot of staff already do, because they move between the admin building and the depot. A lot of the services I look after do that. So we've got that flexible environment now because we've upgraded the ability through this crisis. I suppose we've moved very quickly to upgrade things, and we've got Wi-Fi in both buildings, so we can really offer a flexible environment for staff that return, which is good.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Councillor Castle. I note that the CEO did put up some additional information on the chat function, but I'm not sure that that's part of the recorded video, so I might just go to the CEO to just outline that advice you just provided.
Through you, Nicole. Yeah, we've just been advised that the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries is working on guidance for local government operations, specifically around libraries, playgrounds and skate parks, which will be relevant to us. So we'll be waiting to review those when received on this Thursday, the 4th of June.
They love to keep us on our toes. Okay, I'll go now to the seconder, Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Nicole. Just the question I had in relation to the arts relief funding, and at what point, noting the review of the EOR responses is intended to be complete by the 9th of June, just wondering around the timeline for, I guess, turning that around, noting that there's been a great response, which is fantastic. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing it. Just wondering when it might come to a decision-making forum.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, we're planning for that to come to the meeting Tuesday week, which is the 16th of June. So over the next week, we will be going through the shortlisting process. We've had a fantastic response, and the administration will then prepare a report which we'll go through with the working group, and then we'll bring that to the 16th of June meeting.
Excellent. And just wondering if there's any update in relation to the disbursement of funds from the Ladyville Gardens Trust, and whether there'll be another item coming to this committee in relation to that.
I wasn't intending to bring that back to the committee, Mayor Cole. I think so. We have started the process of dispersing the funds as per the approvals that we've received. What we have done is we have got a grants agreement in place with each of the successful grant recipients. Within that has a set of KPIs that need to be reported on by the grant recipient. I know that this committee, we had a conversation about whether to stage the rollout of the funds or whether to disperse it fairly quickly. And what we have decided to do, and it is consistent with what we've done with other grants as well, is to disperse the funds fully up front and then focus on the monitoring and reporting of the project against its milestones and its measurable KPIs. So with that objective, we get the money out there quickly when it's needed, and is consistent with the plan that they've put forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And I believe there was also a request in relation to some, or the recommendation had some wording in relation to some further engagement in relation to organisations that may work in the space around food stress. Just wondering if there's any update on that.
Yeah, look, I do know that, Maluka, you may be in a better position to answer that question, but I do know that we have reached out to some organisations and we're going through the process of receiving grants that fit those criteria. And I'm not sure, yeah, Maluka, can I pass that to you?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can just add to that we have contacted 2 local food providers and we've given them the opportunity to provide a submission based on the original proposal of the EOI. We haven't received a response as far as I'm aware, so that is with community and business team, but I'll check in, Virginia and I can check in with them the next day just to make sure, and then the next step would be to present a report back to the committee in terms of allocating some funds to these food service providers. So we'll follow up and provide an update.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I also just wanted to note that it's great to hear about the ongoing practical support that the city is providing local businesses via the update from the Manager Built Environment and Wellbeing. And just also in terms of the city's Open for Business directory with the phase 3 changes, it's a constantly moving space. Fortunately, the web is a great tool for rapid updates. Just wondering how that's going in terms of, I guess phase 2 has been marked by some quite prescriptive requirements in terms of dining that are going to be eased, but just wondering if there's the Open for Business directory will be evolving as well over time.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I can answer that. So yeah, it has, as you say, it's been a moving target over the last couple of weeks. So the team were just in the process of rejigging the directory, and they're mobilising some individuals to go out and actually canvass businesses to get an update on where their Open for Business status is. And so we're just, I think what we have done is pause that a little bit so that we can refine that to reflect the new phase. So I would be saying that in the next week to 2 weeks, we'll get that canvassing of input from the businesses in, and then we will be able to start publishing these things. So it's probably another 2 to 3 weeks, I think, at the very least, before we get that up and running. But it's very much, we're actually seeing this as a really good tool going forward. We haven't had anything like this before, so it will give us a really great way of informing locals who their local businesses are and what sorts of services they provide. So we'll put a little bit more work into it up front so that it actually provides us with a really useful tool going forward in the long term, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Nothing further from me.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. I was going to ask about Open for Business too, because we'll probably find that the majority of businesses are now open, but if it's sort of going to change into a business directory, that could definitely be a very valuable resource, but we'll see one of those things that does require a lot of regular updating with, you know, businesses in various states of flux. I also just wanted to quickly raise probably our Director of Strategy and Development questions, but Leadville Village Square, I'm just wondering whether we can front foot on phase 3 and look at the fact that this is due to expire on the 15th of June, but whether we want to keep that running for a little bit longer, and potentially look at Thursday to Sunday, which I know would cost more because you'd have to be opening and shutting the square. But whether we could perhaps just get some idea of if we did continue that through phase 3 beyond the 16th of June, and we're able to get PTA's agreement to continue to reroute the number 15 bus, whether we could look at whether that would be embraced and used by the local businesses and what that might cost and how long we could consider it for. But I think there's some sentiment that Thursday to Sunday are the key days, and that it might be better to open and close if that's an affordable proposition for the city. And also just a minor thing, but I have seen the business e-newsletter covering off points in draft form about phase 2. But I think that was due to go out tomorrow, but I think it really would need to have a review before that goes out the door, because really all minds are cast towards phase 3 now, and we need to make sure that our communications are keeping track with where we're at. So I think we probably need a rejig before it goes out the door.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Cole. I'll make sure that that happens.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to note, the Executive Director of Strategy Engagement sent his apologies for today's committee meeting, but on your point and comments and questions on Leederville Village Square, we can take all those on notice, liaise with Leederville Connect, the town team, and come back to this meeting next week with some advice on what the use of that square could look like during phase 3 and following the end of this current trial, which was set up for phase 2.
Thank you, CEO. I think it would be worthwhile to keep it going if we can afford it and get the agreement with PTA. Is that mic sounding better, Councillor Gontaszewski? Okay, thank you. All right, that was all from me. So unless there are any further questions, I'll put the motions. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Item 7.2 is the COVID-19 budget update. Could I request a move and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. I didn't have any specific questions on this item. I think this is part of our a strategy to start to report on the budget process, given that the budget for 2021 has been significantly impacted through the COVID pandemic, and that there are some quite significant constraints that have been placed on the budget preparation in relation to income generation and expenditure for the city. And so I think that I'm supportive of this item on the budget setting process, and think that this is part of our process by which we need to start engaging with our community on the budget, and considering some areas that are our priority this year that perhaps have always been part of the thinking but are going to be very important this year. And I think that that includes support for vulnerable sections of our community, but also general provisions that may be applied more broadly, but also available to the entire community in relation to bill smoothing and payment of rates. So I guess I'm interested in getting an understanding in relation to recognising these focus areas as to where we're at in terms of the development of policies in terms of our hardship provisions for ratepayers. And we've been, obviously, and we have one coming up, tenants and community groups. We've been having a, I guess, a systematised way of assessing those claims for deferral and waiver of rents, and there's a national and state government approach to that as well. But just wondering, in terms of the City of Vincent's approach to hardship provisions for ratepayers, how that process is developing.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Cole. I can respond to that question. So we're very much focused on our financial hardship approach. There is a policy that has been developed. It's currently under review, and then we'll be providing that to Council for their review shortly. The general approach reflects the standards that are being applied across the sector. So if an individual or an organisation suggests that they are in financial hardship, then we will assist them on a case-by-case basis. And there's a number of different things that we're looking at. So we can put in place a repayment program that breaks payments down into weekly, fortnightly or monthly payments. If someone is in financial hardship, then we won't apply an interest payment to any of those payment plans. We'll make it as easy for them as possible to comply with that. We also will not be applying any administrative costs to our financial hardship processes. And debt recovery, the next stage that follows this process is on hold as well. So we won't be aggravating or escalating any situations where individuals are in hardship. I think that's probably the key mechanisms at the moment. We do actually have a lot of these mechanisms in place, but at present, and the team are doing a lot of this already. So really what we'll be doing is focusing on communicating this to the community and making sure that those people who really need that support know how to get hold of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that update. I think, yeah, look, as I said, I'm supportive of this update and of starting to have this conversation with our community. I think it's really important to note that at this stage we are projecting a reduction in revenue of close to $10 million in the financial year. That assumption has been based on parking and Beatty Park revenue being reduced by half. Just in light of the phase 3 restrictions being implemented this weekend, is there any, how would that be, those forecasts be reviewed, and at what timeline throughout the financial year?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, our view is that we need to maintain a cautious and pessimistic approach to the budget at this time. So we will be reviewing it each quarter, and then if we start to see the metrics improve, then we can look at appropriate budget revisions at that time. It's interesting because with the parking, what we're already noticing is while you know, businesses may start to open up again, with the behaviours are different to what we normally see with parking demand. So we're going to have to watch and see how it unfolds. People are using less public transport at the moment, are more likely to use parking bays, that sort of thing. With Beatty Park, I think we mentioned earlier that phase 3 means we can open up Beatty Park more so than it is currently, but not at the back to normal levels that they are used to. So we still need to account for a very a pessimistic outlook in terms of revenue there as well. So our view is at the moment we've got a bit of a worst case scenario budget in front of us. Let's stick to that, and then if we start to see the metrics improve, then let's improve that cautiously quarter on quarter throughout the year.
Thank you very much. Nothing further from me.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, look, I agree. I think it's really important that we're having this discussion now. It's part of our commitment to transparency, and in particular around what it will be a very difficult budget this for the next financial year. And I think it is really important to be having these conversations about the context in which we will be setting the budget and setting rates. It's obviously going to be something that's of great interest to most of our residents and all of our ratepayers. I'm looking forward to the aspect of this discussion that includes the impact of the GRV revaluation for this year. I think that is going to have a significant impact and is not necessarily something that's widely understood in the community. So I imagine that's coming in. So I think, you know, it is really important to be having this ongoing conversation, and hopefully with restrictions easing, what may start off as a worst case scenario will look brighter as the year goes on, but I guess we have to be cautious about it at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Just some comments from me. If we are adopting the budget in July, I do believe that, I understand that we are adopting a sort of conservative and pessimistic budget, but I do believe that it needs to be responsive to phase 3, and we need to understand that if there are shifts in revenue streams between this point in time and the time that we adopt the budget, that I would like for the budget adoption to be as contemporary and current as possible, because it is a big thing when you're taking rates from ratepayers, and I think that we do need to actually see whether there's time to see whether our parking revenue increases. We probably at this point it's very early days, but need to know when we're going to start charging membership, noting that that's been suspended at Beatty Park. But once we actually have an idea of the revenue streams and capacity and what we're actually offering and what sort of revenues coming in the door, I would like for that to be factored into the budget as soon as it's possible. Also, just on the rate setting statement that we are probably due to advertise in the next month, I think it's very important that we go out with the rate setting statement with our hardship provisions and policy as part of that statement, because it does need to be put in context. And I think that needs to look at, we've been talking about rate smoothing a lot, but we haven't received a final answer on whether that will or won't be possible. And I think these things we need to know what that would be and what it would look like, not just for those experiencing hardship, but for all ratepayers, whether that's something that we are in a position to be able to offer. I think that needs to be settled at the time that we're dealing with the rate setting statement, and also look at whether we're going beyond hardship provisions to look at where GRV does have an impact, where people, where we might say we're looking at whether we have zero increase in rates yield, but GRV being very difficult to manage, very complex sort of circumstances where we do have ratepayers that are receiving an increase, whether we look at some kind of rebate mechanism. Obviously yet to be determined, and this is early days, but I think that if we are going to travel that path, then I'd like for that information to be advertised along with the rate setting statement, so that that context of how we're dealing with GRV, dealing with this issue of the expectation of a 0% rates increase and what that has meant now that the GRV has gone forward, that is a very difficult and complex conversation. And so to move forward with the rate setting statement without putting in context any treatment to that, or how we'll deal with hardship, or how we'll deal with people who are experiencing increases as a result of GRV, we need to deal with that. We need to outline how we will. So I also just wanted to get an update on one of the more major capital works projects that we're talking about for the 2021 budget is the community hub, and I just wanted to ask when a business case will be provided to council on that item ahead of making a budget decision on that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can provide that to the next council workshop in draft for consideration.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions? All right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Next item 7.3, financial assistance recommendations for city tenants, East Perth Football Club Incorporated. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you. I just had a question to confirm. I note that the WA code appeared to be released on the 29th of May, and I just wanted to confirm. It looked from my very brief review as though it was all in line with our current decision making, but could I just get, final confirmation?
Yeah, I can confirm that we have maintained oversight of that to ensure that we've been consistent with the code.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, look, I'm supportive of this. I note that this request, or this recommendation, covers the period for which we've had pandemic turned down. It does not cover the existing amounts currently due and payable, and that is a separate item for, I guess, the club to to address. But yes, this seems to be in line with our previous decision making on this matter, and in line with the varying codes of conduct at state and national level. So supportive of this one.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Castle, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions from me, thank you.
Thank you. Just a comment, when you do read about the situation that East Perth Football Club is in, where it's owing the city money from previous payments on turf maintenance, etc., it does make you worry that it is a very difficult situation for clubs. And I just wondered whether we did have the discussion about the Lottery West funding for community, etc., during during this time, and where you can see that people actually have sort of a backlog of debt to pay off, seriously declining revenue, and that this, you know, there is obviously the provision of waiving, which the city is doing in accordance with the code, but there still does remain that debt. And I'm just wondering if there's been any further information on Lotteries West and whether some of our clubs that find themselves in these situations could get some further assistance to help them get through this time.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, many of our community groups and sporting clubs will be eligible to make an application to Lottery West. They have left their grant assistance through COVID-19 fairly open, and the intent is to assist the viability of clubs and community organisations. So I think if it relates to something historic, which you've pointed out that possibly is not covered, but I can advise that I'm having a separate conversation with the football club about that, and we'll deal with that as an additional matter. But we do have a responsibility to council and the community to demonstrate that we have the full view of the financial position. And with East Perth Football Club, the outstanding amount was actually a resolution of council previously, so we needed to comply with that previous resolution. So, but going back to your earlier comment, yes, we would definitely be encouraging sports clubs and community organisations to look at what grants are available to them if they are struggling, and our community partnerships team are talking to them on a regular basis. So I'll ensure that they are reinforcing that in their conversations.
Thank you, Director, that would be appreciated. And I just did wonder whether we do need to allow any additional funds in our budget for clubs that can't meet their costs beyond, you know, the agreement that we come to over waiving and deferrals. If we are having clubs experiencing issues with paying for turf maintenance or for paying for, you know, outgoings, do we need to provision for that moving forward if we find clubs facing these situations where they're already having historic issues with payments?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, Mayor Cole. I think we've tried to take it on a case-by-case basis, but also to provide a fair framework that we are applying consistently across the board. So I suppose the best advice I could say at this time is that we have applied a consistent approach, and then if groups are still struggling, and we've had conversations with them about their application, if they're still struggling and that's not sufficient, then the door is open. Let's discuss other ways. It might not even be that it needs to be the city supporting them financially. There may actually be other avenues as well. So, but we'd be more than happy to help them work through those challenges at this point in time. A lot of them are very keen to get back into the sports clubs and get back to training and get matches started. So I think there's a little bit of an air of optimism around at the moment. So hopefully we're starting to see some of these clubs get back on their feet.
Yes, absolutely. It's, and I think phase 3, whilst it's not going to fill a stadium, it certainly has been a big step forward from phase 2, and it is really positive. So that's good. All right. Any further questions on this item? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I'll declare it carried. Okay, item 8, announcements by the presiding member. I don't have any this evening other than to say thank you to the team for your persistent ability to roll things out in an incredibly tight time frame, noting that the detailed advice is coming in on Thursday for the change on Saturday, and I think this is something that I just think that the way in which the team responds and really just goes all out to make it happen is a sort of a bit of a hallmark of this period, and I'm very appreciative, but also hope that you're not getting too tired out by the additional workload. But I do think that everyone's doing a fantastic job, and it's really appreciated by by your council, as well as by our community sporting groups, businesses who have really benefited from advice, etc. So I just wanted to say fantastic work, and hope you can keep up the momentum, making sure that you take rest when you need to on weekends, etc. Is there any general business this evening? Any items to raise? No, okay. We have no confidential items tonight, and the next meeting we do have a COVID-19 weekly update and community benefit incentives policy to come to the next meeting. I am wondering, we did have the conversation about leadable gardens, but we probably do need to factor in whether we go and advertise another phase for the leadable gardens funds, given that I think we've got about 50% of the way through, so that might be something that we need to have a discussion about relatively soon as well. But yes, I think that's it for tonight, and we'll close the meeting at 5:46 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody.